This video will be focused on giving a solid introduction to Kant's epistemology, divided into 3 sections: learning some Kantian vocabulary, understanding phenomena and noumena, and then thirdly, Kant's categories. When learning Kant, there are 4 main words you need to understand: a priori and its opposite a posteriori, then working in combination with those, analytic and synthetic. First, I'll give you definitions and examples. Something that is a priori for the most part expresses a statement reason alone can arrive at, while something a posteriori can be best explained as something that expresses empirical fact, unknowable by reason alone. So for example, I could say all bachelors are unmarried men. What is this? It is a priori because it does not necessitate anything other than reason alone. However, if I were to say a dog is on the table, this is a posteriori, because you cannot arrive at that conclusion through reason alone. A priori and a posteriori work together with analytic and synthetic judgments. Now, what are analytic and synthetic judgments? It's going to get a little complicated, but hang in with me here. An analytic judgment is a judgment that expresses nothing in the predicate but what has already been thought in the concept of the subject. An example Kant gives is all bodies are extended. This is analytic because the concept of body contains within itself extension. You don't gain a greater understanding of bodies when told they're extended, you have just analyzed it. A synthetic judgment is a judgment whose predicate concept is not contained in its subject concept but is related. Given Kant's examples again, we are now given the following statement: all bodies have weight. Contained in the predicate is something not known in the universal concept of body, and gives greater understanding of bodies, therefore leading to it being synthetic. Now when grouping together and organizing them, you should have something that looks like this. I recommend taking time to pause and read through these. There might be some confusion, so I'll fill in the blanks. For starters, why is an a posteriori analytic judgment impossible? Analytic judgments rely on something called the principle of contradiction. And because of this, no matter if the concepts that supply them are empirical, they maintain being a priori analytic. Quoting Kant himself, for the predicate of an affirmative analytic judgment is already thought in the concept of the subject, of which it cannot be denied without contradiction. Such is the case of the judgment, all bodies are extended. Denying that a body is extended is a contradiction. Because of this, no matter what, all analytic judgments are gonna be a priori no matter it being empirical. Such is the case illustrated in gold is a yellow metal. It contains empirics, however, yellow and metal is already contained in the subject concept. Denying would lead to a contradiction, thus making it analytic, thus making it a priori. Now, to explain math being a priori synthetic. Synthetic judgments do not alone use the principle of contradiction, instead relying also on other things. I do not have time to talk about it all today, however I will give the answer to the question of how math is a priori synthetic. When looking at math, for example that of 1 plus 1 equals 2, it might be very clear that the principle of contradiction is to be used here, for 1 plus 1 will always equal 2 and stating otherwise would lead to contradiction. However, that does not apply here, because when taking a close analysis, you will find that 1 plus 1 only contains within itself the union of 2 numbers into 1 number. The particular number that unionizes them is not contained within itself, thus leading it to being synthetic. I imagine it being a priori is self-explanatory. A quick note that differs Kant from thinkers, such as rationalists. Kant believes that a priori thoughts are useless unless given external experience to organize into objective experience. Following from this, we find that Descartes thought inner experience is immediate and we experience the external world only mediately, while Kant believed the external experience is immediate and our inner experience is only mediately possible through the experience of actual things. Now that we understand a priori and a posteriori, as well as analytic and synthetic judgments, we may move on. Imagine there are 2 parts of the mind, and these 2 parts are what we're limited by. These 2 parts are time and space. Now, space and time are basically the prerequisites for the mind. They're referred to as pure intuitions. I can best illustrate this by asking you to imagine an absence of space. You can't. You can imagine an absence of objects, but not space itself. Now, think of an absence of time. You can think of time pausing, but you can't think of an absence of time. Now, to reiterate, these are called pure intuitions, and everything beyond this we can't know, see, nor think, such as an omnipotent being, since omnipotent beings are above time and space. What goes into the mind is raw data. This raw data is, for example, our senses: taste, touch, hearing, and so on. What we learn from this raw data is what Kant calls phenomena. Now, this phenomena is what is used to distinguish from noumena. Noumena is an object as it is in itself, independent of the mind. However, we cannot know this noumena because as it's outside of the mind itself, as it is beyond time and space. Sure, we can sense what is outside the mind, but we cannot do that without having it run through the mind itself. Thus, we cannot know what is outside of our senses themselves, making them noumena. Using a table, for example, we don't know what it is in itself, all we know is the phenomena which it comes in appearance. Do keep in mind, with things in themselves, they do not cause appearances. We merely create appearances through our experience of them, since we are merely receptive creatures. Hopefully this idea is clear as we move on to the third section. The next thing we'll look at is Kant's categories. I'll be giving an extremely simplified view. Something to note though, Kant spares definitions of the following in the Critique of Pure Reason, and he expands on it more in his follow-up. These categories are a priori necessary for any possible cognition of objects, because they apply to all possible objects that can be known through appearance, although are strictly limited to phenomena and does not help us figure out what the thing in itself is. For Kant, there are four main classes: quantity, quality, relation, and modality. These are all working together. Within quantity, we have examples of unity, one, this, that, the; plurality, some of the kids were walking, they were walking, several, etc. With totality, all, every, etc. As we can see, all forces applied to a mass accelerate that mass. And these categories are a really good time to show how not all things are learned through experience, thus differing from empiricism. This concept of categories, such as me seeing and understanding there is one, several, etc. things, isn't learned from experience. Maybe the word is, but I am speaking of the very concept itself. As Kant would say, it is innate within us. To reiterate, since categories are innate within us and are a priori, all classes and categories Kant speaks of are not learned from experience, and are thus all a priori. Within quality, we see things such as reality, negation, limitation. Yes, true, is, etc. With negation, not, no, false. Limitation, un, a, in. So there are things like ahistorical. We have things like that is false. I am unable for limitation. With reality, an apple is an apple. With relation, we have inherence and subsistence, causality and dependence, and then finally, community. We can see things like substance, property, exemplifies such as, etc. And a property of gold is it being yellow. We can also see this with apple and apricot as it pertains to community. And the final class is modality, possibility / impossibility, existence / non-existence, necessity / contingency. We can see things like may, can, might for possibility, will, is, exists for existence, and has to, would, must, needs to for necessity. So for possibility, I might eat an apple later. For existence, this apple exists. And for necessity, a brain is necessary for humans to function. Because of these categories' a priori nature, they apply to all phenomenon, And these are the principles of human understanding to Kant. Alright, that's it for the basic introduction to Kant. Whether you want to hop into his critique of pure reason, or you just want a quick learn on one of the most important philosophers in history, I hope this achieved what you were looking for.